Chapter 9. Delbert Wayne Duncan in his pod at Amerijail. Delbert Wayne Duncan sensed the circadian lights growing brighter, and he bolted upright to prepare for the waste bot's arrival. Judging from the brightness, Delbert Wayne Duncan estimated that the waste bot would arrive in about 15 minutes. Frustrated by Amerijail's policy of clock prohibition, Delbert Wayne Duncan sighed in disappointment at his inability to test his time estimation skills. Before he was incarcerated, Delbert Wayne Duncan used to slide out of bed and mosey into his living room, where he would plop into his easy chair. There he would reflect on his vague dreams and his nascent day over a mug of coffee and 3 cigarettes. Now he was forbidden tobacco and caffeine, and the sleep aids definitely enhanced his nocturnal hallucinations. It had become his habit to reflect on visions that were more genuine than his view of the pod. Delbert Wayne Duncan had dreamed once more of his 2 sons, Robbie James and Stephen Dale. He had been playing alongside them as if he were also a tot. 3 kids in the heart of boyhood, consumed in wonder and bliss. Suddenly, his 2 sons flapped their arms and flew away. They didn't even look over their shoulders to say goodbye, but he could hear one of them say, "We can fly now." Is that how his sons felt? They had been sent off with their mother, Jennifer Dolores, to live with her parents in a remote part of Mississippi. Her mother and father were both Jehovah's Witnesses and were by all accounts aggressively dull. Delbert Wayne Duncan reflected on his fathering skills. He spent more time with his sons than most fathers spent with their kids. Moving crank only took up about 8 hours a week. He had an arrangement with one of his business partners where he drew a fat salary for working every now and then in his partner's body shop. The arrangement included 6 months of paid unemployment and as much benefit time as he wanted. Delbert Wayne Duncan chose to spend most of his free time with his family. He had taught his sons to fish catfish from a pay lake, which isn't really fishing, but the boys always enjoyed themselves. He made sure the boys practiced martial arts for at least 2 hours a day, and he enforced a rule that they could never raise a hand against each other. He had built a treehouse with the boys one summer and built a clubhouse with them the next. He had plans to build go-karts with them after they improved their welding skills. 7 and 9, and they were already drawing beads. How could those boys want to fly away from their father? Delbert Wayne Duncan's concentration was broken by the gentle, synthetic femme voice that permeated his tiny cell. "Wastebot." Delbert Wayne Duncan grabbed the lightweight, shatterproof emergency pail and screwed the lid on his 2 overnight urinations. He sat on the floor and anxiously waited his next command at the foot-high gate at the bottom right-hand corner of his door. The circadian lights had grown noticeably brighter when at last he heard the anticipated "open compartment door" purred by the focus group-tested femme voice. Delbert Wayne Duncan placed the container into the holder and scooted away on his butt before the femme voice said, "Step back." Delbert Wayne Duncan waited, the hushed whooshing and vrooming sounds followed by the command of "open door." He slid the door open and removed the sterile container and gently slid the door shut. He set the sterile, empty container on the floor sensor and sat on his bed to await the next stage of his routine. "Please sit on the bed," was followed a short time later by "prepare to toilet." At this prompt, Delbert Wayne Duncan stripped down to his undershirt and briefs and donned his plastic occlusion glasses. He stood in front of the door where he could be viewed by Nurse Renee with hands held at face level, his fingers spread as wide as they would go. 2 weeks prior, Delbert Wayne Duncan had been transferred from the Shelby County Jail to the new 8-story Amerijail complex that served 6 Tennessee counties as well as federal detainees. Amerijail was still scouting candidates for corporate naming rights for what was temporarily called the unit. The unit was billed as the jail of the future, premised on trimming the stout fixed cost of incarceration, liability insurance, workman's compensation, legal retainers, and the ever-oppressive staffing cost. Amerijail was set to go public. Amerijail was following a backwoods trail originally blazed by Walmart several decades ago. Walmart did not start out in big cities or even populous suburban areas. They built stores where no one else built stores and only later invaded the retail hotspots. The unit had been designed to serve the rural areas around Memphis, but they would receive some Shelby County spillover as well. The unit touted better court date attendance than county jails, who were often plagued with shoddy vehicles and last-minute call-outs. To the right parties, they quietly emphasized advanced behavioral techniques that fostered a spirit of cooperation between inmates and the law enforcement establishment. Unbeknownst to most inmates, including Delbert Wayne Duncan, the unit was divided into 5 time zones. Atlantic timers were toileted at 4-hour intervals starting at 4 a.m. local time and concluding at 8 p.m. local time. Like all inmates at the unit, they used their emergency containers during the 8 hours of sleep time. Meals were served to the Atlantic timers in their living pods at 5 a.m., 10 a.m., and 3 p.m. local time. Inmates on good behavior were usually offered an ample snack at 7 p.m. local time. At the other end of the spectrum, the Pacific timers were toileted at 4-hour intervals starting at 8 a.m. local time. Central timers like Delbert Wayne Duncan started their toilet routine at 6 a.m. local time. The composite folding door contracted, and through his occlusion glasses, Delbert Wayne Duncan smiled at the now familiar essence of Nurse Renee. "Good morning, number 11, Nurse Renee cooed. "Good morning, Nurse Renee." Nurse Renee resembled a nurse in much the same way a scarecrow resembled a farmer. Inside the safety of the 7-foot power suit that could increase the user's strength by a factor of 4 stood a small man named Willie Devine. One of the many advantages of the nurse suits was that literally anyone could operate one and no one would ever know who was inside. Nurse Renee, like the other nurses, did not allow for the user to talk with his or her own voice. However, the occupants were trained to memorize a few dozen commands that translated into pre-recorded messages. 3111 would produce a message in Nurse Renee's voice that said, "Good morning, number 11." To the newbies, the nurses resembled football mascots. Their saucer-shaped eyes never blinked. Their mouths did not move when they talked. They said the same things over and over and over. But the longer the inmates stayed at the unit, the more they treated the nurses as intimates. It was a manipulated sentiment, deprived of human contact. The inmates regarded the nurses in much the same way that lab monkeys regarded cloth monkeys that emitted milk. Social isolation was the key to cost-cutting. No communicable diseases, no gangs, no cliques, no conspiracies. There was no pressing concern for containing body odor. This reduced the need for showering to a once-a-week ride through the car wash and reduced staffing significantly, to say nothing of septic fees, soap, washcloths, and towels, and the laundry costs these antiquated items engendered. The designers took measures to curb the object de lust qualities of the nurses. For that reason, Nurse Renee, Nurse Betty, Nurse Latifah, Nurse Chung, Nurse Maria, and all the prototypes on the drawing board were designed to look and sound like they were 80 years old. The COs enjoyed working the nursing suits. They liked looking out of peepholes in the chest as inmates arched their necks to address their caretaker in the eye. The COs felt all powerful in their shark-proof power suits. They would deliver a mild shock if touched, and they could deliver a taser shock and spew pepper spray if need be. But mostly the COs enjoyed the filter air that smelled like salt and lemon and tequila. They could never go back to a county jail and breathe feces and farts and urine and sweat all day. Besides, Amerijail paid better. With his hand on a padded rail, Delbert Wayne Duncan was slowly marched with 11 other inmates through the darkened halls to the toilet foyer. There they would stand at attention and listen as the prior 12 were toileted. Nurse Betty gently commanded, "Number 7, please be seated." She repeated this request 2 more times, and Delbert Wayne Duncan surmised that number 7 was a newbie who had not yet gotten accustomed to the cold water bidet. The cleverly designed occlusion glasses enhanced the clarity of the nurses' starched white neon uniforms, while rendering everything else dark and fuzzy. Delbert Wayne Duncan dutifully faced forward, but his eyes stole sidelong glances at a pacing Nurse Renee. The prior 12 were marched out of the toilet area, and Delbert Wayne Duncan's dozen were marched into the illuminated room. The occlusion glasses highlighted a line of fluorescent floor tiles, and Delbert Wayne Duncan marched to toilet number 11, where he stood at attention. At Nurse Renee's command, the men performed a left face. At the next command, they lowered their briefs. At the final command, they seated themselves on robo-clean stainless steel. Gazing through his wraparound glasses, Delbert Wayne Duncan was able to discern that a dark-skinned leg flanked him on either side. The toilet odors were no competition for the dominant body odor on this, the 6th day since showering. A flash of nausea came and went. "Do you need a laxative, number 6? "No, Nurse Renee. I will requisition a laxative, number 6. "That won't be necessary, nurse." "Please try to concentrate, number 6. A bell sounded, and the men braced for the bidet jet with groans and labored breathing. Either they turned the temperature up a notch, or else Delbert Wayne Duncan was getting used to it. He heard the wincing and the moaning, but he made a concerted effort to breathe slowly and deeply. It wasn't so bad this time. If he could change one thing about the toilet process, Delbert Wayne Duncan would allow for more drying time before he was instructed to raise his briefs. But Nurse Renee was not soliciting suggestions, and he obediently elevated his briefs and stood with palms extended in anticipation of the hygiene bot to squirt his hands with antibacterial gel. Back in his 8x4x9 triangular pod, Delbert Wayne Duncan sat on his bed and awaited for the padded wall screen to turn itself on. He would not be disappointed. The unit chaplain, who, unbeknownst to most inmates, was a Tennessee law enforcement official, read selected passages of Scripture. This gave way to a brief public service announcement instructing the viewer on the proper use of the emergency pail. This gave way to a PSA that made Delbert Wayne Duncan yell at the screen. It was a young guy in his 20s telling the viewer that he thought he would be called a snitch or a rat. But actually, people respected me for taking a stand. It cut to a kindly senior official stating that law enforcement has changed. We are no longer adversaries. We want to help you do the right thing. It cut back to the young guy. I thought that cooperation was a bad thing, so I asked questions. The whole time the young guy talked over footage of him pushing his cute kids on a backyard swing set or laughing with his movie star wife. The backdrop was upscale suburban. How could they do this? Delbert Wayne Duncan muttered aloud. Wealth and domestic tranquility were byproducts of snitching? Did they want to get people killed? The wall screen spewed more propaganda, and Delbert Wayne Duncan did what he could to resist it. The circadian lights had gone full spectrum, and the wall screen paused to announce that breakfast would soon be served. Through the center slot, Delbert Wayne Duncan received a tray of steaming victuals. Amerijail had purchased a controlling interest in a company that produced Grubber Rubber. Grubber Rubber was a proprietary rubber product that could be sterilized hundreds of times before it started to crack. It could be fashioned into prison chopsticks, eating utensils that resembled a cross between traditional chopsticks and a tongue depressor, without posing much potential as a weapon. Not every user noticed a rubbery aftertaste, and some users came to prefer prison chopsticks to more traditional utensils. The food was the best feature of Amerijail. Pre-cut meals that were always hot and the portions always generous. Delbert Wayne Duncan enjoyed an omelet that vaguely tasted of chicken soup, pre-cut patty sausage that vaguely tasted of chicken soup, hash browns that tasted like chicken soup and butter, grits that tasted like chicken soup and grits, jelly toast that tasted like chicken soup and jelly toast, and orange juice that vaguely tasted like orange juice. With breakfast out of the way, Delbert Wayne Duncan returned his attention to the wall screen. They were running yet another pharmaceutical ad where a nurse icon burst onto the screen and said, "Delbert Wayne." The avatar spoke flatly. "Would you like to read your mail?" "Yes." "Please say, 'I believe,' 3 times. Delbert Wayne Duncan performed the request. The mood control ad ceased suddenly and the screen went dark, and then it displayed a 4-foot photocopy of a letter from Jennifer Dolores. Delbert Wayne Duncan scanned the page for a date. What date was it anyway? He reminded himself to remind his wife to always date every letter if and when he ever straightened out his communication account and was able to send emails and make phone calls. Jennifer Dolores' letter concerned the hassles in trying to establish a communication account for her husband. Amerijail performed a background check on every member of her current household, and they discovered that Jennifer Dolores' mother had a few legal problems before she met Jennifer Dolores' father, and now Amerijail was demanding an additional risk fee in order to jumpstart email and video conferencing. Handwritten letters were always charged a per-page risk fee that was cost-prohibitive, and Jennifer Dolores was trying to get a waiver until they had a full-fledged communication account. She promised her husband a deluge of email and pictures when the account was finally established. For 60 seconds of view time of a handwritten letter from a high-risk collateral was roughly the cost of dinner at Burger King. Delbert Wayne Duncan studied the XOXOXO booby bear signed in his wife's distinctive girlish script. The image faded from the screen. He stared at the blank pane for a few minutes until an ad for a law firm came on at enhanced volume. Then the unit chaplain performed breathing exercises that Delbert Wayne Duncan mimicked. He had fallen into a trance when the image on the screen was replaced by yet another anime-style nurse avatar. "Delbert Wayne, would you like to speak with your lawyer?" The avatar was drawn to resemble a 25-year-old nurse, and her voice was young and smooth. Yes, I would." "Please say, 'I believe,' 3 times. Delbert Wayne Duncan complied. A 40-ish woman with long, bottle blonde hair started speaking. "The law firm of McGee & McGee are sorry to inform their clientele of the untimely passing of Donald McGee." Delbert Wayne Duncan's heart pounded his sternum. Oh my God, I don't have a lawyer. Mr. McGee succumbed to an allergic reaction to an antibiotic following a hospitalization. For 32 years, what about the fortune I handed over to that silly bastard? Are you going to refund my money, you fucking bitch? The recorded messenger continued to drone on and on about the deceased's brilliant career. The shingle might have read McGee and McGee because Donald McGee's wife also practiced law, but she never concerned herself with criminal matters. The criminal law firm died with Donald McGee. In my 12 years of service at McGee and McGee, I have come to know Donald McGee as a man of unending integrity. Delbert Wayne Duncan tuned out the wall screen and planted both hands on his temples. I don't have a fucking lawyer, he said aloud. I don't have a fucking prayer. The message dragged on for what seemed like hours.